Reactive Training Systems.
Hey, what's up, Reactive Training Systems? I am Coach Ross Leppala. Today, John Garafano and myself are going to chat about his return to the platform. Mike was unable to join us, so it's just us two today. John has a lot of hardships, a lot of hurdles to overcome. He, competed for many years, and then it had been, I forget the exact date, but since around 2020 that he had competed. So it's been quite some time, and has had life circumstances and injuries and different things to overcome. And John was recently able to make his way back to the platform and healthy, already signed up for his next meet. So just really cool to see John return. John does a lot for the sport, a lot for RTS and RTS athletes, and just really grateful and excited to share this conversation with you all in the RTS community. So let's dive in with John, everybody. So I don't know how you start a casual conversation when we just said start a casual conversation, and now here we are, hit record.
How do two dads start a casual conversation? Well, let's just talk about what our kids did to us today. It's the laundry list of things.
I mean, I think it's probably a better question than what I did to Rosalie than what she did to me.
True story. I don't
Bombard
know
her with dad jokes.
I don't know who's a bigger kid, me or my kids, because I like to scare them. Like not like mean scare, but like, just like pop out from a corner and be like, and just like test their flight or fight. My kids have no flight; they're all fight. So that's something I've learned. You know.
Oh man, that's funny. That's
Yeah.
funny. Rosalie, it depends on who's around. If there's people around, she's like tougher. If there's nobody around, it's not quite as tough. It's how small. I gotta flail myself onto the ground and be small.
Yeah. Well, it's
Yeah.
funny because like bugs are like that. So I was just getting out of my truck and coming into the house with groceries after shopping because it's like the laundry list of things. So I get out of the truck and there's this gigantic wasp. I mean, huge. I don't know what kind of insects you all have down here in the South, but it takes some adapting. Okay.
Yeah.
This thing came after me like it was mad. And then it turned direction and headed toward my daughter who came out to like come say, "Hi, daddy." And I've never seen her run so fast, you know? So it's good to know that like a bug this small, actually is more like this big, uh, you know, a bug like that can make her run. But me, I jump out from a corner and there's nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely a lot more wild insects and bugs and all that stuff down here than there was up north. That's for sure. They
Like
don't get
there's,
frozen in the winter.
it's crazy. There's spiders. My wife thinks she saw a scorpion and I'm like, "Man, I don't know if there's scorpion here." There is.
Well, at least here,
Oh,
we're 3 hours apart now that you moved down to the Carolinas.
mhm. Yeah. She thought she saw a scorpion the other day and I'm going, I'm out. Like scorpion, no way, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, well,
How
you
strong
know,
do you think scorpions are? Do you think they're
I
stronger than you?
that was an interesting transition. Like I know what you're trying to do, and that's funny, and that was a good one. I think a scorpion is likely stronger than John Garafano. Um, though we'll find out.
If a scorpion were to power lift,
It would certainly be better than my deadlift. It would certainly be better than my deadlift. I might have it
what's
on bench though.
what's up with your deadlift? Why do you say your deadlift?
So leading into the meet, I dropped 3 deadlifts that were something I should have easily pulled. Like about 10 kilos under what, or about, it was about 15 kilos under what projections were that I could pull for a sub max, like single out and eight in training. And I dropped it 3 times because my left hand started opening up. So, little background, and I know we wanted to get into this, but in 2021, I had a neck injury that stopped me from competing. It was very bizarre. I ended up waking up and my hand went numb. It just was completely numb and it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And I wasn't able to like wash my face. I wasn't able to pick my kids up. I wasn't able to train any of the power lifts for quite some time.
Yeah.
And so that situation, I can get more into the specifics on it, but that situation, it obviously got better and I was able to compete. But leading into the competition, it was a it was a big rolling of the dice of, well, what can I handle? What can I do? And will my
Yeah.
hand open up because of some of the neck issues that I've had?
Yeah. Well, damn. So there's a couple of ways we could go about this here. Let's back all the way up, because it sounds like it's been some time since you've competed. When
Yep.
was the last time you competed? Aside
So I
from
can
last weekend?
I competed equipped in 2020 and I competed raw 2019 at 2019 Raw Nationals. And I stopped competing because COVID was going on and all of that kind of stuff. And in the middle of COVID is when I ended up getting the neck injury, which prevented me from further competing. It took about 2 years to rehabilitate the neck and regain lost muscle mass. And so it was a very frustrating, thing to know kind of what's happening, right? And to not necessarily know a prognosis of when it was going to get better. That's very frustrating. And I can empathize with people that go and get imaging, that go and, take a very clinical route to try to understand their symptoms and prognosis and those things, because I was in that boat of like, hey, I can't do these things. I want to be able to do these things. Heck, I can't even do activities of daily living, right? Like washing my face and other stuff. I need to be able to do that, pick my kids up, carry groceries into the house, that sort of thing, let alone, squat, bench, and deadlift. And what was challenging with that was I lost muscle mass on the entire left side of my upper body. So pec, shoulder, tricep, bicep, most important muscle bicep, lats, like everything like atrophied on the left hand side of my body. I'll never
And
forget. I
not the
was like,
right side. So it was like visually imbalanced.
oh, well, so funny story. I was in a pool on a vacation with my wife and my kids, and I was sitting in the pool and I had my arms up like this. And my wife was looking at me and she's going, "What's going on? What's happening to your pec on your left side?" And I'm going, "Yeah, it's a loss of muscle on my left side." She goes, "It looks like there's a big crater in like your pec." And I'm like, "Yep, yep, that's." And so it's alarming, it's
Yeah.
frustrating, and it's a lot to kind of work through. And so that is the biggest reason why I didn't compete for so long. And then, of course, life throws stuff at you, right? So my wife and I ended up having our youngest son along that time. And then he had some health issues. So we ended up having to be completely focused on that,
Yeah.
which took a lot of training time away. And then we ended up moving, so then we land here in the Carolinas and we're like, hey, things are looking good. There's a good gym nearby. Training seems to be rolling in a good direction. Let me roll the dice and go compete. I was inspired a lot, quite honestly, from Mike's return to the platform
Yeah.
and like seeing him return, seeing his enjoyment, his lack of expectation for the day, and wanting to see if he still enjoyed it, wanting to see where it took him. And I was also inspired a lot by you, Ross, of the way you navigated your, I want to call them injury, but like your pain
Yeah.
and lack of progress related to the pain and those sort of things. I was very much inspired by that. And I thought to myself, this is a great time to just register for me, just register. And if you do it, you do it. You don't, you don't. But just register and see what happens.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like what was the, the back end of why I made that decision.
The decision to not compete was pretty much primarily driven by the injury more than anything.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I had worked with several rehab professionals too. Like I mean, I probably worked with I think I worked with 3 physical therapists specifically, and, you know, I had great care, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Big shout out to Dr. Nathan Daly, who is part of our RTS training lab and has worked with a number of our athletes over time, and
Oh, yeah.
us too,
Yeah.
kind of patching us back
And
up
us too,
together.
for sure.
Yeah. Big shout out to him because so he lives about 30 minutes from me. And right after the move happened, I started having neck symptoms again. Things are going on in the left hand. Things are happening. Actually, traveled to the right hand too. And I'm like, oh, that's new and scary as heck. And I'm like, oh, that's not a good thing. I probably should really get into early intervention with treatments here, and I should get some help and assistance. And so I reached out to Nathan. We actually did, in-person consults. He did remote consults with me during the move. And when I landed the ship, he did in-person stuff with me. And it was exponentially better with his treatment. I'll tell more about the story with Dr. Nathan when I kind of give like the meat recap, because that's a
Yeah.
cool story too. But he was an integral part of regain of function, regain of strength, and it was very beneficial to have him in my corner.
So it sounds like, you had this injury first back in 2020 timeframe.
Mhm.
Do you know what happened? Like what was the leading cause?
So what has been explained to me is that I never had imaging done, and maybe that I should have. Maybe I should have had a surgery consult. It is what it is. The good
Right.
news is that I've regained strength and function and am able to compete and do those things. So the end result was positive, but at the time I didn't really know. And remember, it was happening during COVID. There was a lot of limitations around getting care, scheduling care. There was a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
which made it particularly challenging. So the best guess, so to speak, based on symptoms, is a cervical radiculopathy in the cervical vertebrae, C5, C6, C7, some sort of pushing on the nerve, and the quote unquote sort of like nerve damage,
Mm-hmm.
piece. The thing about it is I've tried not to focus too much on diagnosis specifically, but more on how do I work around the symptoms, what movements actually help it improve it, what things can I do? And if
Yeah.
the end result is, and this is what Nathan's really great at, Dr. Nathan Daly, is if the end result, if the steps that we need to take for the symptoms would be no different than going and getting imaging, and we're seeing improvements with the treatment modality, then maybe we just hold off on that until we've run out of bandwidth and we can't find something, right? Then we
Yeah.
can go to the next level of care. And so that's kind of been the way that I've navigated this injury over time.
Gotcha. You had it happen. You were able to rehab it and get back to a healthier place. But then you also had a lot of other life things coming up that were keeping you from training with an intensity of meat prep.
Yep.
But then you get back into meat prep. Or actually sounds like before you get back into meat prep. It sounds like this flare up, you had the neck flare up again when you moved.
Yep.
To me, I hear like maybe a load management thing going on. Is that
So
accurate? Like what's that look like?
so there was a period of time that I was a long period of time that I worked with Mike for my coaching. And I made substantial progress using emerging strategies in its purest sense, the way we have
Mm-hmm.
presented it in the RTS course and the way that I would have coached it with anyone.
Yeah.
And I spent some time working with Mike on using Track R after the 2 years kind of went by of me rehabbing the injury, getting back function, those sort of things. we ended up using this experimental load management system that Mike had been using called TrackR. And in the earlier iterations and versions of it, there were some things that don't happen now in it. And as a result of some of the stuff that have happened to me, that system got better. So particularly like one area that Mike looks into specifically is looking at like neck compression. And so thinking about things like arching and bench press, or, movements that would put some compression on the lower back, or spinal shear and spinal compression is how he has it coded. And that stuff was really useful at looking at load management and saying, hey, what can we do proactively to make sure that things don't flare back up? I have also lower back issues as well, not as severe as the neck, but they intermittently kind of poke their head up. So that workload management system was really beneficial. After my youngest son was born and he came out of the hospital, we had a bunch of health issues with him, and it resulted. So backdrop for a second. I have 4 kids. Why?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm a glutton for punishment. I've got 4 kids, and they're all, I'm just joking. They're all amazing. I love them, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And training with 4 kids, being able to manage this plus a more than full-time job and all that kind of stuff. I don't got to tell you that, it's challenging to balance all the hats and be able to put on all those hats. So that is always at the backdrop of my training. Is there could be a sleepless night. There could be things that go on with kids, and I have to create some sort of dynamic system that allows me to train around that. So whether if I'm using traditional emerging strategies, that model isn't really based on dynamic changes at a weekly or even session level. Where that system operates best, and correct me if you feel differently, but that system operates best with someone typically with a stable recovery environment, a stable kind of system. They can usually handle the same workloads roughly on a weekly basis. For someone like me, where, again, I could have a sleepless night or some things going on with the kids or whatever it is, I need something that's dynamic. That's what I have perceived. Would you agree with that for your observations for yourself or for other athletes?
Yes, with the little bit to add to it. Like, if we think about the indoctrinated emerging strategies as we teach it, you write your microcycle, you repeat your microcycle to the T. You repeat it every single week until you peak, and then you pivot, and then you do a different one. When we think about it, like, time to peak is the exposure to the stimulus, meaning like if by 1 at 8 and 70 by 5 by 5. And if you could have squat by 1 at 8, 70 by 5 by 5 on session 1, and squat ramping sets of 8 for volume on day 2. That is a different stimulus. So it is a 1x frequency. You're not going to get, even though you're doing squat for the same exercise, it's a different stimulus. So I've started to also look at that in my own training and think, like, if the stimulus is the protocol, let's call the stimulus by 1 at 8, 70 by 5. Maybe I can't handle all 5 sets. Maybe I can only handle 1 set, but I'm still getting the stimulus, the nature of the stimulus, just not the magnitude of the stimulus. Right?
That's really cool.
So that's where, like, for some of my intuitive adjustments I'm talking about from a load management standpoint in training, is I'm trying to get as close to the stimulus as possible. And if sometimes I need to peel back a little bit from the total amount of work, I'm still getting the stimulus in, and I'm still getting pretty close to it. I'm just not getting the magnitude of the stimulus. And so the way I like to think about that is, especially if things are clean-ish, they're not always cleanish, so that can be always introduce some noise. But if my normal rate of gain is, say, 15 kilos, and I somewhere have a lack of sleep and need to reduce the magnitude of the stimulus, then I'm likely not going to get 15 kilos of rate of gain, I might only get 10, but I'm still likely to still trend and move in the same direction. It will still have the same directionality, just not in the same magnitude or velocity.
It's really neat to hear how you've adapted a system of emerging strategies to be more dynamic for you. And I would say that I've done something similar more recently. But what I think is really interesting is this is exactly what Mike was doing in a more external, data-driven model, looking at fatigue parameters based on time, looking at workload based on time, and those sort of things. And I think that it's really neat that you've been able to do that for yourself, for your training. And I think that's the part that I was missing a little bit with when I was using the system is I would go up, the system says I must do this amount of stress. And I know you struggled a little bit with that as well.
Yeah.
And I think now in my training, I'm more focused specifically on how do I have this intuitive approach like you're having, know that I need this stimulus, but also be careful to make sure that that stimulus is robust enough to drive adaptation, but not so much that it's going to drive me into the ground and prevent future recovery or future performances. So
Yeah.
a little bit about what I've been doing recently. So coming back to training normally after the move, and I know we wanted to talk about this a little bit, but one of the things that I initially did was I said, well, I just moved. I lost like something like 15 pounds during the moving process because I wasn't really focused on nutrition or training. And I don't think I had a barbell on my back for almost 3 months. It was something like that. It was the longest stretch of time that I've had sans the initial injury. Right.
Right.
So coming back, there was a lot of muscle mass that needed to be regained. So I said, okay, well, right now the goal is not E1 or M. The goal is muscle mass while also regaining some skill. What would that look like if you were writing training for a lifter of yours? And that's how I approached it. I treated myself like I was one of my lifters, and I took a spreadsheet and just started writing. And I took our training log and just started logging training. I just said, okay, well, I need to be in a caloric surplus. I need to have progressive overload. I should probably work in assistance exercises that are single joint in nature and that feel good. And I said, okay, well, I did this block for, let's say, 6 to 8 weeks. Now, this is where I'm at the end of it. Where would I go if I wanted to get better at my skill? Muscle mass there's a good amount of muscle mass regain that happened. Skill started coming back. I was only training the competition lifts like once a week to make room for the other stuff. I said, okay, now if I wanted to take this and be a bit more specific with it, what would I do? And I didn't immediately go right to the high frequency craze. I said, okay, well, if squat frequency is once a week with a bar on my back, let's go to 2. Bench was at a 3. Let's go to a 4. And deadlift, I honestly kept it at a 1 because I was concerned about the neck in my hand and I wanted to slowly progress that. So the block went on. And one of the things I noticed early on in that block was that I was absolutely terrible at gauging top sets because I haven't trained it. So I just wasn't very good. What I started using was, and I know like this is the buzzword, but like I started using wave loading. I said, okay, well, let's start a block off somewhere conservatively around a 5 to 6 RPE, and let's weekly progress it. Now, here's my observations with that approach, because I have observations here. Okay.
Okay.
It's a tool. I have a toolbox. I go in it. I grab a tool when I need it. It worked great for squat. I had one of my best like 5 RMs doing that style of training completely unexpectedly, big jumps week to week. It was okay for bench press. It wasn't stellar. It was okay. Deadlift was horrible. And I attribute that because it wasn't the same feeling and skill. So if you pull a 5 out of 5 and then you pull a 5 out of 9, they feel completely different. There's
Yeah.
different levels of force production. There's different rate code. Like there's just a lot going on that's different.
Yeah.
And so that's what I found for me, that the RPE can't be too low on deadlift. It needs to be high enough. For bench seemed to be okay as long as I was doing around a 7 RPE to start. Anything below that was kind of felt like it wasn't really bench, if that makes sense. And I recognized that early on. I realized it early. And so I started changing how I wrote training. So observations about wave loading, and or another way to say it is a progressive RPE in your block, something that starts out low and goes high,
Right.
particularly on the
Before
top
you
side. Oh,
before you go on that, I want to just point out something for, in particular, people that are self-coached out there that might be listening, since that's essentially what you're doing through this process is self-coaching.
yep,
Is because one of the key tricks to successfully coaching yourself in this way and writing training for you that fits you is you have to rely on stepping outside of yourself as a lifter and what you want to do as a lifter, and observe from the coaching role what is happening and what the lifter is needing. You have to be able to separate yourself as though there's two different beings, even though you're in one physical vessel.
totally.
Continue with your observations, sir.
So, so I completely agree with you. So that's why way back in the day, like 2014 or 2013, when I was last self-coaching around that time frame, I used to email myself. I would email myself a check-in.
Yeah.
And then when I did my check-ins for my athletes, I would go through it as if I was any other athlete. And I know it sounds weird, but
It's a
it
good
helped me
strategy.
to just put a different hat on, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So the observation of the wave loading tactic, first off, I've had to use it a few times for lifters. I would say 90% or greater, I'm using a static microcycle for athletes. I think most of the time, people can usually repeat a microcycle, repeat a static RPE, and they'll be fine. Maybe it takes some
Right.
adapting, takes really good load selection. And I think that's half the battle. I think sometimes
Yeah.
people start off too hot.
Yeah,
Raise my
definitely.
hand.
Guilty as charged.
Raise my hand.
Oh, wow. It'd be neat if we could start out here. Let's try that. Ooh, that didn't go so well.
Right. Right. And, you know, I've actually gone so far as like new lifters when we're doing micropsych, like we're doing emerging strategies for the first, second, third block, to saying, okay, I want you to go into your first session, just knowing that you're roughly about 5% weaker. Whatever the numbers say, you're probably 5% weaker in that first approach.
Yeah.
And usually we get pretty close. If someone is drastically weaker than that, that's good observation to say, hey, maybe our pivot isn't tuned right. Either it's too long or
Yeah.
it not specific enough or something like that. Or sometimes we go in 5%. I just had a lifter do this. One of the gentlemen that competed with me at the meet, and his
Hmm.
bench was on fire. The plan from his pivot going into his first week of his next development block, he went to bench and he's like, hey, something is up. I feel very strong right now.
Sounds like
Looking
a
at the
good
pivot,
problem.
it was a good problem to have. Looking at his pivot, we had more specificity in the pivot. We had like hard sets of 4, 5, and 6 for most of the bench training in the pivot. And for him, that helped him retain the skill enough to go into the next development block and really not lose much. But anyway, digressing a bit, I think that most people can repeat a microcycle with some help. But then there are those people who likely need some dynamic workload management. And that might be using a system like TrackR. It might be writing a static microcycle, but giving the person freedom with constraints to say, I'm going to do less if that's what's required today, or I'm going to do more if I feel like I need to do that for some reason. Technique, don't feel like I've gotten the right exposure, didn't really get the load right, whatever it is. with some type of guardrail, I think that you can do that with them.
Yeah.
And another tactic is to progressively increase the top set RPE. And that's something I've used with a few lifters. So I wanted to try it in my own training. So it was a cool experiment, and I'm glad I did it. What I did leading into the block and the meet, though, is I used a peaking block. And that peaking block had static microcycle. It had a static microcycle, static RPEs, peaking. And I ran a more traditional taper. And when I went to the meet, I performed significantly better than my expectations based on estimated 1RMs, based on all of my projections. I was beyond my hope. So kind of going into the meet, I had dropped 3 deadlifts and I was like, wow, I don't know what this is going to look like going into the meet. So I put a number out that I had dropped 3 times and said, I'll be really happy if I can get it.
Yeah.
And there was significantly more there on my 3rd attempt deadlift, which was really cool. And that was exciting.
Yeah.
I attribute that to 3 things. One, Dr. Nathan Daly was there and treating me as I was warming up. So, which was really cool. Like, how cool is it that you're like competing with your PT? It was his first meet. So that was super exciting to see him compete. And by the way, I always tell people when they want to work with Nathan, like my line is he walks the walk. He's no slouch. Dude's pulling 550 and he's got way more in the tank. Like he is a lifter, you know? So he gets
Sounds like he works weekends too.
Right. And so it was cool to have him there because one, I got to see him compete for the first time. So that was exciting. And I got to help him call his numbers. But 2, he was able to be like, hey, John, here's a couple things to throw in. And I found them significantly helpful in the warm up. The second thing is I think the taper, again, was a different strategy. I had not tapered this way in a long time. So I think there was something about the taper that was really beneficial. And then the third thing was the environment. I think that sometimes lifters can get a whole lot out of the environment, more than they suspect. Yeah. So I want to present like the environment for you. I signed up for this meet. It was the 2025 USA Powerlifting Words Have Weight meet in South Carolina. I did not know what the meet was about. I just saw that there was an open meet. It met my timeframes. I am in USA Powerlifting, so hey, why not? So I registered, and it worked out well because I had 2 other lifters that could do it with me. So I registered for it. The day of the meet, first off, the meet was at Sorinex headquarters, which was bananas.
Pretty cool.
It was so cool. They had all this lifting equipment from like turn of the century. I mean, it's a museum. And if you're a nerd like me, you love it.
Oh, fantastic. Absolutely. I would love to go to their facility one of these days.
Let's do it, man. Come on down. I'll take you. It'll be a lot of fun. It's only an hour away.
Yeah.
So it's at the Sorinex headquarters. The meet director, she's awesome. Her and her husband are great people, and the environment is super supportive. And then I saw this thing. I saw these years on the backdrop of the banner. And the meet was actually a charity event. And I didn't realize it until I got some of the details. And it was a suicide prevention charity meet. All the proceeds of the meet went directly back to local suicide prevention efforts in South Carolina. So that was really exciting that there was a way to give back to the community.
Absolutely.
The father of the son who had committed suicide actually spoke at the meet, and it was very moving. I don't think there was a dry eye there. And he talked about how powerlifting was so important for him, and it was so meaningful, so deep to him, his community. And this was a member of the meet director's community that it happened to, that his son had committed suicide. So deep interconnection.
Yeah.
So here I am at a meet that benefits other people. my friends and fellow lifters are there.
Yeah.
And then I got a nice surprise that my wife and my youngest kids drove out to come see me, and they have never seen me compete before. And there's something about it, if you've never experienced it, when, you know, your kid is yelling your name, go daddy, go, like, and you hear it, there's just something about that.
Yeah.
And all the nerves are gone. There's just this thing inside me of, this is cool. It's cool to be strong. I'm so blessed to have this opportunity. And how cool is it that I'm giving back in multiple ways? There was
Yeah.
a 9-year-old boy there who competed push pull, and I believe he did an unofficial American record while he was there.
Cool.
And everybody was like cheering him on, excited. Everyone was yelling for every lifter. This is what it felt like to me when I got in the sport, and why connected to my roots of like why I got in it. So I think that third thing had a lot to do with why there was more kilos on the platform than I planned.
Yeah, man. That emotion, that energy will do it for sure. That's really cool to hear that all of those things transpired. Thinking about like some of the strategies to get you there, to get you to that point, so that you can have that kind of an experience.
Hey, if Ronnie Coleman was a powerlifting coach, he might have said, everybody wants to build custom training programs, but nobody's got a process for how to do it on the regular. But we do. You see, most coaches rely on trial and error, and that's fine if that's your jam, but we wanted a coherent process. Way back in 2015, when I'd already been coaching for over a decade, I finally had learned enough from enough sources that I was able to put the pieces together into one coherent process. We call it emerging strategies. The bulk of our 16 world record setting powerlifters set those records using an emerging strategies program. We talk about emerging strategies a ton on this podcast and everywhere. If you ever want a single thorough explanation for how to implement the emerging strategies process, well, that's the emerging strategies course. The emerging strategies course includes 8 modules. That's almost 24 hours of video instruction covering everything. We teach fundamental concepts and basics all the way through integrated examples and case studies. You can watch it at your own pace, as fast or as slow as you want. Oh, and you know the RTS community, our private community that offers you just a stupendous amount of value all on its own? Well, if you enroll in the Emerging Strategies course, you get 6 months of that community membership for free. If you have any questions about some concept, you just post it in the network or jump on a live office hour call with one of our RTS coaches and you get your answer. If you'd like to enroll or just learn more, to include seeing a full lesson list, all you have to do is go to reactivetrainingsystems.com and click on courses in the main menu. You're going to love it.
You know, you mentioned wave loading and some of your observations of wave loading. I know in my own training, one of the things that I've observed is that if I start out too hot and heavy on week 1, I can't quite sustain the block in my normal way. Whereas if I start out with a bit of an ego check, if I start out just nice and gentle, you know, making sure that I'm a half to even a full RP under what the protocol is, the block outcome is generally much higher quality in terms of like rate of gain and peak and how I feel physically and all those things. And the difference between static microcycle and a wave loaded microcycle. And we've talked about it in a bunch of different lenses. I tend to view this as like the goal is to get people to a static microcycle. That's my aiming point. That's where I really want to try and get people to. And not everybody is there, and not everybody is able to start there. So like in an instance like this, a wave loading is a tool to try and get you closer to that. And wave loading becomes a tool to get a person closer to that who has that, can't quite get a pulse and read on the RPE as accurately as what's needed, as precisely as what's needed. That's a lot of what I think about when I go through this kind of context of conversation. And it seems like you're kind of arrived at some similar places with it. Like the wave load in and of itself isn't the thing that's actually driving the stimulus or the adaptations.
It's the exposure to the movement and the protocol. And I think that it's more of a range than I gave it credit for. So what I mean by that is it would be pretty common to see in my training, single adenate and I don't know, 80% force, for example, on squat or bench or deadlift. So you're working up to a hard single that's slightly heavier than an opener. You're updating your estimated 1RM, and then you're taking, let's say, 4 sets of 4 at 80%. Well, the challenge, I think, with warming up to that single adenate mentally is if that number is lower than your perception on what do you think it should be. Let's say you start off and you think that it should be, I don't know, 220 and it's 210. You can feel a certain kind of way about that, right? You could judge the block is now negative. So now there's this psychological component where you're like, hey, is this intervention actually effective? And I think that matters. I do think it matters because I think that athletes can often feel frustrated and not necessarily want to see a block all the way through because they have this perception that they should always get better every single week. When in reality, there's probably a range. We're probably acutely able to perform closer to our strength ceiling on some days and strength floor on other days based on the fluctuating recovery that we have.
Yeah.
I think one benefit that wave loading has is you don't necessarily get hung up on that because you're waiting for the heroic week that happens on week 4. So I actually put that in for people that can get a little bit more neurotic. I don't know if that's the right word, but that can get overly fixated on the top set load. I think that wave loading can be a very useful tool to help them to see a block through and not overthink it. Just do what needs to be done and build through the block. So I actually think that that's a cool use case, so to speak. But I agree with you that if they had just taken a single adenate week 1 through 4, they probably would arrive at the same place. I don't think that wave loading is inherently better than static RPEs. And I think you're correct in that the goal should be to get someone into a static RPE because then you can compare more accurately different protocols. This created a 10 kilo rate of gain, or this one had 20. Ooh, the one that had 20, we may want to pay attention to that because that might be something that we bring into our greatest hits leading into a meet.
Right.
When you're constantly changing the exposure, you're instituting more noise, like Mike has said, and you're less certain that this protocol is driving those adaptations. So I agree with you. I think there is use cases beyond just mental expectation on wave loading. I do think that some athletes are inherently more fatigue prone, where they might be only able to, let's say deadlift is like the number one that we hear, but I don't think that it's inherently more fatiguing than squat. But let's just say that you have an athlete that is they experience a lot more fatigue on deadlift than the other lifts. They might only be able to do one hard pull every block. And by hard pull, I mean above 7 RPE. For whatever reason that is it trainable? Is it something that we can get better? Can we actually influence it? Maybe those things are true. And I don't think it's a bad thing to think like that, to think like, oh, well, if I gave them more work capacity blocks or whatever, we could probably get this better. I think that's good to do. Lately, I've been swinging a little bit in the other direction of saying, rather than fighting this thing that I'm noticing in a lifter or in myself, why don't I just work with it?
Right.
And say, okay, well, this athlete can only really pull once heavy during the block. Well, if that's the case, we can still have 3 really good weeks of training. We just have a governor that we need to have on this. And as long as we have that governor, we can still have that good week. So Mike has been talking about this a little bit of like that send it week where he's allowing athletes the last week of a block to, in context,
Yeah.
you're not the block leading into the meet and sending it on your week before the competition, but like, you're a couple blocks out and you want to push it a little bit. He's allowing that to happen. And I think that that's wave loading in a different way,
Yeah.
So I think, again, there's other use cases on why wave loading can work and can work well. Another tool that I've been using in my training that's useful to think about, and I spend a lot of time thinking about this now, is proximity to the last exposure of a lift. You and I got into this a little bit. We were talking about this when I was at your Intentional Athlete Summit. I think we had a sidebar conversation about protocols. I think it was the only time we talked about protocols, interestingly, the whole weekend.
Right.
But we were talking about this, and I was saying how I've been thinking a lot about where I place the secondary, tertiary, quaternary, whatever movements in a microcycle and how they influence one another. I've been spending a lot of time on this. So for the first time at this meet, I benched the Thursday before the meet was on Saturday. I benched on Thursday. I have never done that before. I've always had 3 days off. And it wasn't an easy bench session. I hit 8 RPEs, like it was a normal bench, 2 count pause bench session. What was interesting about that was I was totally prepared for the pause. I was totally prepared. Bar was in my hands and I was ready for it.
Yeah.
So I felt like there's something there with that. Squat I did 3 days out. It wasn't a hard squat. It was a 2 count pause squat and it was taken to a single out of 7. But it was heavy enough for me when I did my walkout with significantly more weight that I felt ready for it.
Yeah.
Deadlift was taken on Monday. And again, I was ready with something in my hands. I felt ready to take my opener in my second attempt. So that's another thing that I played with. And it's something I've been thinking about in my coaching now is where do we place these exposures within the week so that we can hopefully come back into our competition exercise ready. Now you can take this too far. You talked about this too. You're like, John, I typically don't talk to my lifters about this because they can get real crazy about like if they miss something, what to do next. And you're not wrong about that. So you and me being dads, our kids keep us up. We miss training, whatever it is, something happens, or my kid who like splits his head open and has to go to the ER, like you miss a training session. Now what? Now what do you do?
I think it depends on the person and where they're at. Primarily speaking, I tend to default to the idea of if you can get the work in without it bleeding into the next week, get it in. If you can't, then you miss a session. If in the grand scheme of our training over the time of our lifting, if missing one session is going to be that detrimental to capturing our potential, well, then we're some overly sensitive organisms. And I don't believe that the expression of strength is that sensitive. If it were, I think we'd see some other signs and signals that would suggest that, but I don't believe that we're seeing any of the signs and signals that would suggest that for most people.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, am I going to, like, for example, if I think back to when I graduated college and first moved up to Alaska, I was working 100 hours a week. There wasn't time to train. It literally did not exist. So I didn't touch a barbell for about a little over 2 years, almost 3 years of zero training. It took me about 6 months once I got back into the gym. It took me about 6 months to rebuild what had taken me over 10 years to build up to that point. I started when I
amazing.
was 12, and at that point, when I graduated college, I was 25-ish, so 13 years, and it took me 6 months to rebuild what it took me 13 years to build. Like, to me, that's a massive data point to suggest that missing one session is minuscule. Yes, consistency is key in athletic development. Yes, consistency is one of the most important factors for any athletic pursuit. And we don't need to big deal it. In my opinion, I think our mental stress reaction to missing a session is more harmful than missing the session in and of itself.
So I recently had an athlete check in, and he was like, hey, my bench really doesn't feel good, and it's down, and I don't know why it's down. So I go into his log and we take a look, and I see that the last 2 Fridays, so he does his comp bench on Monday, his secondary bench is Friday. That's how we have it set up. It's a long pause bench. His last 2 Fridays, he missed his training. Now, squat and deadlift is continuing to perform well, but for him, in the expression of skill and skill practice, and likely force production practice, maybe even the amount of muscle mass, maybe there's not enough workload. There could be a lack of peripheral stress as well. But missing those sessions meant that his ability to express his top end strength is down. So I said, okay, well, this week, let's get all 3 of your sessions in, and let's see what happens to Monday. And lo and behold, he performs at roughly about 2 to 3% greater than his last exposure, which is what we would expect with him, because he had hit that Friday session. So there's something about that was priming him and getting him ready on Monday for that bench. And you can hear it even beyond looking at the numbers. You can listen to the qualitative stuff of I feel rusty, the bottom position doesn't feel right, pausing feels foreign, feels heavy in the hands. That's a big one. And when I heard those things, I said, I think it's because we're missing these sessions. Let's see what happens this week. What's cool about that is when you know it, then you have a buy-in for some of that stuff. I don't know about you, but I've often in my training sometimes been like, it's Friday. I got the 2 count pause squat or the 2 count pause bench. And it's like, well, got to do it. But you're not as tuned in as you are for the competition lift. Lately, what I've been thinking about with my training is all of this is important. All of this is a cohesive recipe. Without one ingredient, it tastes different. It doesn't hit the same way.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of emerging strategies is if you can keep that recipe consistent, you can change it over time a little bit here and there, but you don't want to drastically change it. If you keep that recipe consistent, then you can say, hey, this is what we produce doing it this way.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one of the key points to really emphasize is that you want to be able to repeat the recipe. And I'm not suggesting or recommending the missing of sessions. I very rarely miss a session. It takes a good bit of life interferences to miss a session for me. And I think that ought to be the standard for most people who are serious about wanting to improve, whether it be in powerlifting or anything else. If you want to improve, you want to get better, you got to do the work. You got to put it in. You got to practice. And show up and treat it with importance, even if it is something that is seemingly less important. Bulgarian split squats. Well, if you're going to half-ass things, then you're going to get half-ass results. And if you put it all the way in there, if the recipe is to do a by 10 at 8 and you're doing a by 10 at 6 because it sucks and you don't want to work that hard, you've just changed the recipe. You're not going to get the same thing out the other side. If you think of your favorite food in the spices that you put in there, the spices are, the salt on a steak is the smallest part of the whole thing. But if you don't salt the steak just right, your steak is not going to be as delicious, even though it's the smallest thing. So I totally agree. Like having those things are important. And I think uh, trying to clarify one of the ideas here too is that it's not that I don't think about or disregard importance of like proximity.
Mhm.
It's also that if we get too in the weeds to be too definitive of it has to happen in this sequence, in this proximity, when that gets interfered with and interrupted, because it is going to, it will happen,
Yep.
period. People have that neurotic reaction and they go, oh no, I messed it up. And I think like the reason why wave loading becomes a good tool for people is because of that same reaction. So in a
Completely agree.
way, it's a strategy to avoid allowing them to have that mental reaction that is not helpful to them, whether they know it or not.
I would add to that sometimes, like you've experienced, missing something in your training for whatever reason was actually one of the single best things that you've done.
Yeah.
And it's just like I don't know, I've been playing around with this biscuit recipe. It's me coming to the South, I guess. And and I'm like, was doing it and I forgot baking soda one time. Just forgot the baking soda, went with baking powder and completely forgot the baking soda. And lo and behold, it came out better.
Yeah.
I'm like, huh, interesting. And I was making these parallels back to emerging strategies as I was doing it, of course. And I said to myself, this is like you miss your Friday, whatever bench slot, and you come in on Monday and you feel better. Or for whatever reason, your training session gets cut short and you end up coming in on Saturday and making up a bench session. And then you come in on Monday and you're like, wow, this is way better.
Yeah.
Sometimes that unintentional change is beneficial on your microcycle layout and the way you train. Sometimes cutting your set short, like you said before,
Yeah.
I'm going to give myself permission to do the 70 by 5, but I might only do 2 sets. And then you come in to go deadlift the next day and you feel way better.
Yep.
So sometimes the experimentation can result in meaningful changes to the rest of your training. So I think it is
100%.
useful.
100%. And we just have to pay attention and see can I repeat this recipe? Is this experiment repeatable and duplicatable? Is that a word? Yeah. And it is now.
It is now.
I had some stuff as well recently for me when I was getting ready for Masters Nationals. My pec and shoulder were just not happy with me. And going into my day 3 was supposed to be my overload bench press. And I'm like, I'm beat up. I'm not ready for any overload work. I'm just going to do some like real low intensity volume just to like move, just for some movement. The next day I woke up and I'm like, oh, hi, cool. That feels good. I wonder, and it was enough to make me wonder, enough to get me to pay attention. Like, if I change that, does it continue? And I literally pulled the overload slot out of the training, out of the microcycle, and put in a percentage based low RPE volume work and the percentage based on the day 1 CE work. And it felt favorable. I carried it into the peaking block. I felt better than I had in a while. And it feels favorable enough that I'm going to use that strategy going into Worlds. Overload slot gone. Bye. See you later.
See, that's really exciting to hear. And I really like where your head is at in this, Ross, of experimentation and paying attention to the emerging information in your session. Like that's the thing. I think people sometimes think emerging strategies is just the microcycle. It's just the week. That's all that you should have observations within your session, and that should guide the way you construct training. Now, you shouldn't overly focus on one session in particular, but those observations are useful, just like you had, where you're like, hey, I feel a little beat up. I'm gonna skip this slot. We're gonna see how this goes. Then you have another observation that the next session felt a certain kind of way. Hey, okay, let's set the microcycle up to do this intentionally, and now let's see what happens. And
Yeah.
then it was favorable. It was a good outcome. That's the repeatability piece, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes people can get hung up on this microcycle must be done to the T, even though you have emerging information, pain, soreness, stiffness, mental engagement, E1RM, force production, whatever it is, you have
Yeah.
emerging information to say, hey, we ought to do something different.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know the full verdict of it yet, if it is fully repeatable. And I think that's the thing that drives a lot of lifters nuts is they want certainty. They want to know that the change of the experiment is going to be producing of a PR. I mean, we learn things that work and we learn things that don't work. And it is, as Mike puts it, exploring a cave with a pen light sized flashlight. And that's the way it is. And the more that we can accept and embrace that and that uncertainty, the better it's going to be because we're going to reduce our stress through the acceptance of that process.
One quick anecdote, because I know we're pretty close on time here, but I thought this was an interesting one. So just like Mike talks about emerging strategies, coaching in general is like two people with flashlights in a cave, and that cave is always shifting and changing. So I typically use a nutrition peaking strategy that I've used for years and years, and it's been very effective for me and lifters. I started the week off on Monday at 75.8, and I'm like, oh, I'm pretty close. I don't need to work so hard. Just drop a little carbs, get yourself where you need to be, stop drinking the night before at, roughly this time. And I did the things that I normally did. I weighed in at 73.5. It was a huge drop. And I'm going, what is happening? I watched myself go down to 73 the morning of. And I'm going, what? I've never dropped 2 kilos, more than 2 kilos like that before. And I was tracking my macros. Like I
Yeah.
was dialed in, like sodium, water. I was dialed in. I'm going, what is that? It didn't impact my strength. I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel any sort of way about it. It just happened. And so I'm looking at it. I'm going, huh, this is the changing cave. John Garafano is different than he was in 2019. And for whatever reason it might be, I'll have to talk to Pia from Fiercely Fueled Nutrition when I jump into her
Yeah.
next office hour and ask her some questions. And maybe there's something there to uncover and try something different. Maybe I just need to eat more. It's a terrible
Yeah.
problem to have. But
Right.
I mean, but it was an interesting thing because even though I had used this thing, it was so reliable. Something's changed, and I need to change with it. I have an observation, and at the next meet, which I'm happy to announce, I'm going to be competing at USA Powerlifting Southeast Regionals.
Fantastic.
Goal is to go and have an awesome experience and have as much fun as I did at this last one. It would be cool to hit certain numbers, but I'm not attached to them. I'm attached to the experience and the fun that I'm having because, and this is a good way to end, I think. When you have an injury like the one I had, there was a period of time where I didn't think I would ever compete again. There was a period where I didn't think I'd have a bar on my back again.
Yeah.
And every time that I do now, I am so grateful. I'm so blessed. And I'm really blessed to have had this experience. It was beneficial in so many ways. I know you and I are going to talk on your podcast, so I'll leave some of that there. But the cool thing about it is I am more focused now on the legacy that I'm leaving with the people that are around me and not as focused on the numbers specifically. It would be
Yeah.
great. I have some numbers in mind. I've got some all-time things that I want to hit that I know I'm capable of. And I'm looking at my 2-year-old. I'm going, this kid is really strong. And I'm going to give him a run for his money because I know one day
Yeah.
he's going to power lift. But
Yeah.
that time will come. That day is not today. So, I've got some numbers I got to put up and it'll be fun to do. And I'm
Yeah.
excited to see where the journey takes me. I would love to compete nationally and internationally. Those are some things that are on my mind and some things I'm trying to do. And more than anything, I just want to show my clients and the people around me that injury doesn't necessarily mean you're done. It might mean
Right.
you have to take trips that are like this, like me, that take 5-6 years. Hopefully it doesn't take you that long. But if you work really hard, you have good staff around you, good rehab staff, and you pay attention to all the variables and you pay attention to the things, it's possible. So
Yeah, man. I totally agree. I think it's fantastic that you have those goals, they're targets, they give you an aiming point, but you're unattached. You're not allowing them to make the choices and decisions for you. You're going to do that based on that emergent information, how you're feeling on a day-to-day basis, on a micro to microcycle basis, all the different things. Really excited that you're back on the platform, John, and excited to hear that you're already signed up for the next one and onwards with your journey.
thanks, buddy. And I appreciate you having me on to talk about my story a little bit, kind of share some things. And I hope that other people can take something from it. If anybody is in it, feel free to DM me and let me know. I'd happily kind of talk to you about my experience. And more than anything else, I want to see the growth of the sport. I want to see more people do it. I want to see more people get what I've gotten out of this because it's a huge thing to me. So that's kind of where I'm at. Is my big focus is legacy now. So thank you so much, Ross.
Thank you, John.
Shh. There is a secret to great training programs, but it's not a magic set and rep scheme with this one weird exercise that powerlifting pros don't want you to know about. The secret is in your training log. You see, years ago, we began developing tools to help you unlock these secrets, and we've been putting them online for free ever since. That's right, it's free for everybody. Now you may be thinking, what's the big deal? People have been logging training forever, and you're right. But the secret isn't just in keeping a logbook. It's using that log to make better training decisions. That's the real secret. This is where the RTS training log excels. You haven't done SSB squats in 3 months and you're wondering what your target weight should be? We can help you with that. Did you overshoot on your top set and you're wondering if you should adjust your back off sets? We can help you with that too. Are you building the most important training block of this year and you're wondering what your most highly effective blocks have in common? Yep, we got you covered there too. There's more, there's a lot more. And yes, it is all free. Not just a free trial, not free with ads, just regular free. You go to reactivetrainingsystems.com, then you click on apps, sign up for a login, and you're in.